They fucked up. You guys are right. They really fucked up. The Queen of the Vol and everything. They fucked up on that. Because I'm thinking about WoW and
Yeah.
like how old WoW content, like the Lich King was really pimping, but now we're stronger than that. And you like there's a sense of scaling, but like even from the boss fight mechanics, I mean, Elders just and Guardians are just not that interesting compared to Aziri and their design and how the entire fight is.
Because that's
So
the
it's not that
thing.
I necessarily agree with like not having that progression. Again, I stand
No,
by.
I agree with
I
the
dislike
progression part.
that it's Aziri specifically.
Because that's the point exactly. Like the Aziri fight still stands up, and we all agree about that. And also, I think it's different comparing it to WoW, because in WoW, while it really sucks when you go back to do like mount runs of Lich King or something, at least with that, it's kind of like you're doing it for transmog, so you're doing it for cosmetic, so there's a reason to do it. Whereas with Aziri, unless you're in like a private league or an SSF league or whatever, there's no reason to go back and farm normal at Zeri. You're not like, I've got to do my weekly at Zeri or my daily at Zeri. There's no purpose for her really to exist.
They could put a hideout in there.
Well, that would be something I'd actually be into. Like if they put a hideout in there or
pretty
something,
cool.
then I would actually be a lot more into that. But it feels weird having such a powerful character from a lore point of view that is still being referenced, because like Incursion, all about Zeri, Legion, like the fact we're still making reference to her now, and then it just to be kind of whatever feels really bad to me.
I've always felt like
you can spawn her, right? Like in the temple, you can spawn at Zeri, and she's got less life than like a rare
the
mob.
weirdest thing that you can do that. I've always hoped that PoE would kind of have a slightly different approach than WoW in terms of like boss fights and creating content. So in WoW, you will have these. You will always it's like building blocks, right? You'll always keep putting it up, like putting like a new building block of content every time on top of each other, right? And it every time it has to be harder. You can't really stop it because there is no reset in World of Warcraft, right? The gear you obtained will be with you forever until the next expansion.
Yeah.
In PoE, right, we reset, we go again, we start over. So like you have to reacquire. So in PoE I've always hoped that in PoE you would have, rather than building blocks, you would have, blocks kind of lined up next to each other. So you'd have tiers of content, and then they would probably decide, right? So you'll have the middle tier, the high tier, and then you'll have at Zeri be considered a high tier boss on the line of other bosses, and these would be sort of similar in power. And then you have the Uber versions on the next one, right? And so at any point in time that you introduce new content, you don't just slap it on top.
It's added in line.
You would try to add it in line, so that you would then say, oh, I really like the Aziri encounter and that loot base. I really like the Elder encounters and that loot type. And it would just feel like you would choose your enemy and you would go there and you would feel nice, and there would be, you would progress towards a fight rather than just being an afterthought. I've always found that once they started making the fights more of an afterthought, I really dislike that.
But like, not only that, like, since we keep referencing WoW, because it's like you see the same issue in WoW. Like the reason why a lot of people want to have stuff like Classic and stuff like BC was you had the progression. So like you make your character, you're now doing the entry level raids, and back then you had to do raid 1 to get into raid 2 to get into raid 3. And one of the biggest issues that people have with modern day WoW is they make a new raid and it makes all previous tiers completely invalid because of catch-up loot. And I feel like we kind of have that issue a little bit with Path of Exile now, where it's like, oh, you've introduced a new endgame boss, sick. All previous endgame bosses are kind of irrelevant. And you can see that they're trying to improve that by going back and adding new loot to the tables. Like the fact that actually changing the loot tables shows they want to make these old bosses more relevant. And that would be one thing that I think would really suck if in 3.8 they added something crazy new loot to its Zeri's loot table, but then it was still a completely face roll fight. Like that would feel awful if one of the best items in the game came from a boss which just became a chore that is a complete face roll, but 1 in 100 times you accidentally kill yourself to reflect. Like that would feel terrible. So I think it would be good if they went back and they had a serious focus on some of those older content make the loot table slightly better, make the fight slightly more fun. In its Ziri's case, as we agree, it's basically just make her tankier, because the fight itself is a fun fight.
There is a place for Ziri where she is right now in her like power, but it's just maybe too short of a time frame for it to really be relevant. So maybe extending that somehow, yeah.
I think maybe having ways to interact with the Ziri would be good.
Yeah.
Like to maybe increase the outcome of, say, certain fragments. Right? You could like the way you interact with, you know, buffing up. Like let's say you have to buff up both wall constructs before you can kill them, or like for an extended run. Like you need to like, you know,
That's
use
cool.
the lightning, or you would have to do the trio in different orders, or you know, stuff like that.
Can I take people on a little adventure, Nikki?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Go for it.
Does anyone remember this small little indie game, World of Warcraft, and Ulduar hard modes? Fuck me, give me hard modes in its Ziri. That'd be so sick. Like you press like a crystal skull in one of the boss rooms, and then it completely changes the fight. And like how in Ulduar you could choose to have the Titan Keepers help you or not help you, so therefore you're getting more of one phase or a different phase. So if your build couldn't do like reflect, you could skip the mirror phase, but then the other phases become harder. And then like the ad phase, you actually get real ads coming in rather than just little shitty zombies walking to the middle. Oh, dude.
If we're talking about reusing content that's been sort of left by the wayside, then if we keep the 5-slot map device, then you could find a new use for divine vessels. In throwing that into the middle of the device, and it could either just be an empty divine vessel that you use to say, yes, I'd like this to be harder, I'm going to put a divine vessel in here, just make it harder. Or you could even capture souls of bosses and then use those to augment it if you wanted to get like a really complex system. You know, a T10 map boss gives this, a T15 gives that. But that might be a bit more development time than is worth on this older stale content. You could just have it be, you put it in and you capture it Ziri's soul, which is useful for something or other, but you make the fight way harder.
I hate to say it because it's such a cop-out now that I think about it with WoW and everything, but like I like the transmog idea, the transmog, the hideout idea that Tarky proposed in different ways, you know, because it's such a, you know, people are always talking about that in PoE, how you don't have access to any MTX and all this, and you know, even creating that tiny little bit of an incentive of getting like a stupid little tiny item, it just creates so much for a player to do. Like I remember when the Twitch drop stuff, it was like some stupid hat, man. And it was just like the freaking craziest shit ever happening when that went down. So yeah, it really shows that people want that.
It's like, oh, I don't really care about, like, it's really annoying having to run a Ziri over and over and over again, but like you get to have this like excuse to run it.
Yeah.
Which is always nice, because it sucks if you're like, oh, I need to do this because I need to get a fragment. But if there's like this excuse you can give yourself as well, where it's like, I need to run it for the fragments, that sucks, but
I might get the pet.
I might get the pet, and that would be nice.
I've always found it a bit weird.
Or the third boob. You get the third boob, or you get like glowy arms. Like if you kill the guys in different order, you can get like glowy arms, or what else do they have?
You know the apparition things that come out of your neck? Ziri would make a really cool one, like all the arms like shooting out and stuff.
There you go, dude.
But that is one thing I have just like always found a bit weird, is the fact that GG hasn't played around more with like pets. Because they've done it a bit with hideouts now by adding hideouts into the game. But as stupid as it is, like when they added like fucking pet battles into WoW and stuff, I never had an interest in that. People go mad for that. If every boss in PoE had like a 0.1% chance to drop a miniature pet version, people would go, people are like, oh, this is such a stupid child's game. People would go mental for that though, because people would want to flex, you know.
Jesus, if it would actually drop like a miniature of the boss, that would be fucking crazy. People will go nuts for that.
Yeah.
Well, like the thing is, it's okay. There's two things to that. It's super volatile, like their entire business model and like the way this game is. I mean, if you might say like if Synthesis didn't kill it, nothing will. But you know, it's kind of like a streamer's life. Like, you know, one day you have 100 subs, the next day you have 3. It's like, you don't really know how to process it. And I think the conversation that we had earlier about like old content really being less and less relevant, I feel like the pets would fit into that so well, right? Because like if you have this like mini pet running around, it just makes sense. Because I think the reason why GTG is so hesitant is because they don't want to add an MTX that somebody's going to pay €30 for, and then always ever only use that MTX because it's their favorite and they're only ever going to use that. But like with this, you're constantly having new content being introduced, and like old pets will become less interesting. And then, you know, you're going to have that sense of progression as new content gets released, which is always. So I like that idea.
I like that.
But then you've got Little Ziri. What about the lore? You've got Little Ziri running around,
Yeah,
dude. She's the queen of the
no,
ball.
no, but that's actually kind of what I was about to say. I don't like the idea of making the boss actually into the little pet. I think that's weird.
Right. So let me.
I think you should have. You should really find something. I like the pet idea. Just don't let it be at Siri.
She
or
fires
fucking
out tiny
Elder or-
flame
No,
blasts.
let me, because okay, let me explain it because I said that kind of as a joke. So this is the full setup, and I'm going to address the monetization. In the case of Zeri, the mini pet you would get would be a Val Oversoul, because that would make 100% sense. They exist in the lore.
Yeah.
There's multiple of them. You just get a little one that flows around. Makes sense. For Shaper, you would get a Shaper Orb. A little Shaper Orb, it makes sense. Like, the reason why it makes sense from a monetization point of view, so if you have the worry that, well, Tarky, if you give someone this free pet, the Zeri, like, Val Oversoul model, they'll never want another pet. If you, again, look at a game like World of Warcraft, where in that game there are free mounts, and then there are mounts they sell on the store. The store mounts, much like the store MTX, will always look better, because that's where you put most of your resources on. The stuff you get for free in-game is a reskin of a pre-existing model. And as Path of Exile gets older, you'll constantly be updating the engine. So a pet that came out in 2019 will look like shit compared to a store mount that came out in 2022. And we already have that with modern-day PoE MTX, where your favorite MTX might be one from 2 years ago, but now they're making better versions. And we saw this with the Mage Guard set, which is just a more high-res version of the Scribe set.
I like that. I like the mini pets idea. What can I say? It's no effort. It's just like a little dude running around, dude.